And the vast majority of people at that level are, whether it's, your Kim Nathan or people like that, they're out there to help everybody. But I also saw some people that, to the outside looking in, Joe Schmo is, he's a great leader, and that, but seeing them act in the way they did in the individual organizations, it was toxic. So I think I learned more from seeing how not to do it than actually doing it, and I always have to second guess myself to make sure I'm not that toxic person.
That's awesome. So can you describe your experience with Leadership Tusk?
Leadership Tusk for me, as I said before, was a very good program. I really enjoyed it. That's why I'm so passionate about it now. Mm-hmm. When I went through, it was 5th or 6th year class. I always forget. Fairly good sized class for that time period. I think we had 14 people in our class, 14 or 16. Most type A's, but not all. And again, it was still then more of a hybrid of probably a third was really leadership development, a third was community awareness, and a third was other, for lack of a better way of putting it. Again, it wasn't as focused upon individual leadership development. Obviously, the retreat, we did all the various programs to determine what type of leader you are, what personality type you are, et cetera, and so forth. And it was touched on throughout the different program days. But I really didn't see the emphasis on it then that I saw during the Guide years, and that to an extent I do now. And again, I'm sure you're aware, one of the people that thought we went too far to the other end of the spectrum in the Guide years. I know I had one friend who went through it, and to this day won't do a single thing with Leadership Tusk as an alum because they just thought it was too touchy-feely. And again, part of that's this person's personality, but part of it was, I think that you have to have a good balance, especially for what we're selling, to whom we're selling it, in regards to entities that are business entities that also have to look at the bottom line as well as wanting to support the community. So enjoyed the class, enjoyed going through the class. Kind of drifted away from it for a few years, and in part because of some negative perceptions people had. And then before I was even on the board, I was approached by a couple board members to say, hey, we're starting to look at where we're at now, where we need to go. Would you participate in some focus groups, et cetera? And that's what brought me kind of back into the fold, brought me back on the board, which I think I've been on for 3.5 years now. And part of it was timing, part of it was, again, I was in that period where I was growing to realize that, just like you get out of the house and realize mom and dad did know what they were talking about, get out of Leadership Tusk and realize they really did know what they were talking about with some of that leadership training that set that basis that it built on later.
Right. So how did you originally get involved with it?
My employer.
Okay.
Yeah, the firm has a long history with Leadership Stark. I think just about every attorney at our firm, and we've got 28, almost every attorney has been through a leadership program, whether it's Leadership Stark, Leadership Tusk. We actually have one of our newer associates who works out of the Canton office but grew up in Philly, is doing Leadership Tusk this year and Leadership Stark next year.
Cool. Great.
So that's my employer was the one that drove me to do that. Because I was working down out of the Canton office but down here usually 1 to 1.5 days a week, and I wanted to, my perception from the marketing aspect of what I do is you can market to anybody what your services are, but the true marketing is where you live, because those are the people you see at the grocery store, you see the Little League games, etc. Did not make sense for me to be one of 400 attorneys in marketing up in Stark County as opposed to one of 40 marketing down in Tusk. So I was the one that, and Kristen Zenas had just gone through it the year before for the firm. So she had strongly recommended it, and I was the one that pushed to say, hey, if I'm going to do this, let's do Tusk as opposed to Stark.
Right. So describe the factors of Leadership Tusk that most influenced your leadership development.
Again, not having grown up in Tuscarawas County, one of the things that, and coming from the background that, as I've described multiple times, the people who were the facilitators, to me, made a big difference. And in particular, Steve Bailey, at the time I went through, Lisa Williams was the executive director. Oh, I'm blanking on her name. But also the people that, at that time, from my understanding, the people that set up each individual program day were community leaders. The court day would be set up with the assistance of Elizabeth Stevenson from the Common Police Court, or at the time, Sheriff. It's been a long day.
That's okay.
Orvis's predecessor. I apologize. But the people from the community that thought well enough about the program to take time out of their day to facilitate that and say what they do and how leadership affects A, what they do, B, what they're all about, and share their own leadership stories, to me was very powerful, because that made it not just about them talking, this is what I do, I'm great, this is what I do, why I do it, why I have passion for it, and how I developed into that was really the most important part of the story. For me, that was probably the most telling thing, is hearing those individual stories, because again, my two prior careers, you're told this is how a leader does it, this is how you lead, this is what you do. You're not necessarily told why you do it or the background of how other people got there. The assumption is they got there because they want to be in charge, because it is a hierarchical type setting.
Right. So are there any aspects of the program that were not helpful or were less than helpful?
When I went through again, I thought it was a good balance between leadership and networking, etc. I will say that there was not as much accountability as I would like to see. When I went through, the class at the time chose their own project, broke into small groups to do that. You had a few people that coasted. I mean, it was very clear they were there because their employer was making them be there. And it was clear to all the class members. It was even, I believe, clear to Karen Williams. Karen and the board at the time, who those people were, and there really wasn't the level of accountability I think that we have now. And maybe I've got rose-colored glasses and thinking that. But that was the one thing that bothered me, and was a negative aspect of it. The other one can be a negative or positive, and it's a cost-benefit analysis. In a perfect world, I would have loved to seen it twice a month instead of once a month. I think I would have gotten a lot more out of it. But obviously, being an employer now and being an owner of the company, I look at it and say it's going to be a much tougher sell to take the person out of that setting twice as opposed to once. We were fortunate that our groups that we broke down into for our project worked well together. Most of them didn't have, one person carrying the load, and you did get extra quote unquote leadership practice on the side working on those projects. So I did like that, but those are probably the two primary things.
Okay. So if you had a chance to communicate the value of leadership Tusk, what would you say?
Well, I have said it multiple times. But to an individual that was desirous of attending, I would say you need to have some type of formalized leadership training to, if nothing else, set the bedrock concepts. And this is a good program to do that. It's a good mix, the way it's structured now, I believe, of both getting you out into the community as well as learning your individual leadership style and how to lead others of differing styles. To an employer, I think that it's invaluable if somebody's going to be in any kind of management position, whether it's a team of 3 or more, to get them in that mindset and get them in the mindset for most businesses. A servant leadership style is going to work. Now, it's not going to work for all. It's not going to work for all industries, etc. But I've seen it in practice, and you get more out of people at the end of the day. You might have to put more into it, but it's exponential as to what you get out of it. So, to an employer, even if you're worried about your employees going and learning the touchy-feely stuff, understand that there is an actual tangible benefit to it, and it's going to create efficiencies. It's going to create better leaders in the long run that are going to retain better people because they're going to be treating them the way they need to, growing their own abilities internally.
Right. So you made a comment earlier about co-leading with your wife. Can you tell me more about that?
Well, it struck me when you said the leadership capacity of 3 or more people.